Hi everyone, it has been rather a while since I last did one of these reading wrap-ups, recent reads videos. It's crazy that once upon a time I used to do these videos once a month, and as we speak I haven't done this since June. So apologies for this. I have started to do sort of mini book reviews on my shorts, and I do them when I finish the book. So I think that's quite nice for capturing like my thoughts in the moment, and then in these longer videos I can talk about the books in more depth and, you know, have a little chit chat. I have actually already filmed this video today. Just thought I would say I've already done this, but I had fluff on my head, I had mascara down my face, and I hadn't chosen the right microphone. So everything had recorded, either I could choose my camera audio or my laptop audio, neither of which is very good. So all things said and done, now we have the proper microphone. I don't think I have mascara down my face, but frankly, if I do, we're going to roll with it now. So yeah, I feel like at the moment I'm sort of plagued with every time I do a video, there's like a problem with my camera or a problem with the SD card, or there's a thing. I don't know, so hopefully this time it works. Anyway, it did feel like today was a nice day to talk about books because it's a bit of a cozy one. Today, although the sun is shining, we have already had rain, hail, snow, and when I woke up there was the biggest thunderclap. There were like two great big like kabooms at, I don't know, 6:30-ish. And so, yeah, we've done all the weathers now. So it is cozy jumper with baggy sleeves and talking about books weather. All that said, let's get into it. So I think I've got about 12 books to talk about today. The first one that I'm going to get into, I'm going to do these in chronological order, starting from the first book after the last one I talked about in my last reading wrap-up. So this is One for My Baby by Tony Parsons. I've got my Goodreads open if I keep looking to one side, and if you don't follow me on Goodreads, please feel free to do so. I don't post like insightful long reviews. I post a single sentence when I finish the book, and it is a little bit like, I liked it, I don't know. So I'm not promising great, wonderful content on Goodreads, although, see, now the tumble dryer is going. Whatever. It's one of those days. But what I can promise is I will put the books I've read on there, and you can also follow me as an author on Goodreads if you so wish. So yeah, the link's below if you want to. Anyway, I've got it open so I can sort of go through the books in order. So One for My Baby by Tony Parsons. This one I barely remember. Yes, it was a long time ago, but I also think it just really didn't make much of an impact on me. So this book follows a character whose name is Alfie. And Alfie has just broken up with a long-term partner, and he's moved from Hong Kong to London, and he starts working in a sort of school for teaching English to foreign students. And he also meets a Chinese man who does Tai Chi in the park, and he starts to do Tai Chi. So we sort of see all these different relationships develop and him navigating life after this big breakup. So it's a lot about sort of relationships and love and healing and all these kinds of things. I really thought that this would be a book that I enjoyed. I think I picked it up. What is with the words today? I think I picked it up either in like a hotel book swap or in our local book swap, which, by the way, if you haven't already seen, I'll link it below. Last week I made a video about the local book swap because I was in charge of the project to do it up. So that's nice. It was an old phone box, so I might have got it from there. I can't entirely remember. But I think the reason I picked it up firstly was because I'd heard of Tony Parsons, but I don't think I've read anything by him. I don't think I've read Man and Boy. Not sure. But also because I do karate and I have done Tai Chi. So I was like, Tai Chi would be an interesting thing to read about, like a character that does Tai Chi. And also I like reading relationship, romance type books written by men. So I was like, I think this would be a thing that I would be into. But actually found it quite dense. I didn't really relate to the main character at all. And it was one of those, so I started reading it in February and didn't finish it till July, I think. So that gives you a sense. I think it was on my bedside table and I just would read a couple of pages and kind of go, oh, I'm not really feeling this. And eventually I think I just forced myself to read it so that I could move on. I am not one for DNFing a book unless it sort of really offends me. So this was just one that kind of bored me a bit. So yeah, it took me a while. Didn't love the writing style. I haven't even written a review on Goodreads. So clearly I just kind of gave it 3 stars, which for me, 3 stars is like, it's okay. So yeah, not very memorable, did not love it. So sorry that I'm having to reach over. My laptop's on a chair in front of me. The next book I read, however, was one that I really loved. This was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Sorry if I've said that name completely wrong. I've never heard it said, so I don't know for sure that that's how it's pronounced. So this was a book club read. I've been in this book club for, I don't know, a few months, maybe since the beginning of the year. And we chose this because we are made up of British and American people, and we have been predominantly reading British and American stories, and we were like, let's read some things from other parts of the world. And I think one of us just sort of Googled books set in other countries or written in other countries and came up with this one, and so we gave it a go. And I loved this. So this story follows a man in Nigeria called Okonkwo, and he is a sort of tribal elder, and it follows his family, his children, his wives, and the tribe. And it also follows the arrival of white men and sort of the arrival of Christianity and westernization within this particular area. And I loved the writing. I felt like each character was so well written, and you really felt like you got in their head and you saw things through their lens. It was just beautiful. And I mean, really traumatic, don't get me wrong, it's a heavy book. Some bad things happen, but it was just beautifully written and interesting and engaging. And for me as well, sometimes the reading experience is something quite situational. And when I was reading this, we went to Cornwall, and we were sort of off the beaten track a little bit, didn't have internet, Wi-Fi, And one evening we had a campfire going. The kids had gone to bed. My husband and I were just sat chatting, and I said, I'm reading this book at the moment and I really, really love it. I'd actually quite like to sit and just read my book. And then I said to him, actually, why don't I read it to you? Would that be nice to be read a story? And he was like, oh yeah, go on. So I read him a chapter of Things Fall Apart, and it was like the most traumatic chapter. It was really a lot. But he found it really interesting. He started looking it up afterwards. He hasn't read it, but he was sort of looking into it and was like, actually, I think this is a book that I would like too. But yeah, there's something about the fact that we were sat by a campfire with me reading a story to him that was just a really lovely memory. And so for me, every time I think of this book, I will remember being sat by a campfire in Cornwall, and it will just be a really sort of lovely connection for me. Anyway, when I finished this book, I looked it up and then discovered, so I hadn't actually heard of it, and discovered what an important book this is. And if I remember rightly, this was the first African written, but written in English, so sort of written by an African person about Africa, but written in English and published in, English-speaking countries. I think it was the first one. So not written about British people about Africa or whatever. It was written by an African person about Africa. And so obviously that perspective of a person who actually really understands the culture and lives there. And it was great. One of the things I loved was that each character was 3-dimensional. Nobody was perfect. Nobody was set out to be, the good guy or the bad guy, or it was just everybody was flawed. Everybody was seeing things their own way, and you could really understand how all of these different things interwove. It was just brilliant. I loved it so much. So I definitely recommend have a look into that book if you haven't read it before. The next book that I read was, and I have this one, so I don't have Things Fall Apart because it was a library book, so my book club order books through the library, which if you want to set up a book club, libraries are really supportive of it, and it's so nice to have that interplay of us supporting the library and the library supporting ours, and yeah, it's nice. Anyway, the next book that I read was Lobster by Hollie McNish. So I came across Hollie McNish when I was a breastfeeding mum, and her poem Embarrassed became really popular, and I love the poem Embarrassed. It still gives me chills. I'll link it below. It's just stunning. And Embarrassed is about breastfeeding in public and big corporations and how we think about, breasts and breastfeeding. And it is just perfectly written. It's beautiful. So I came across her then. I've read, I think, Nobody Told Me. And then this one, I went to see Hollie on her book tour in Folkestone at the Quarter House. And I went with my best friend, and it was so good. We had the best evening. She was supported by, was his name Michael Peterson, I think? And I want to check out one of his books, but I haven't yet. So Hollie's poetry is feminist. It's really easily accessible. I think she's funny and sort of sweary and real, and I really love her poems. She is my absolute favourite. Lobster is about the fact that she is disgusted by lobsters, and so a lot of it is about disgust, but also things that you love, and about love and happiness and sadness. And as always, it's sort of got bits of biographical prose and then the poems as well. And I asked her when she signed it to write something insulting about lobsters, and she wrote, "To Emma, yes, they are frightening and they're coming for us both. Love, Hollie." So that's really cool. So yeah, I got a signed copy at the event and bought the book. It's just really good. I couldn't pick out a standout poem because they're all fabulous. They're just, yeah, even if you don't love poetry, but you love feminism and sort of insightful views of human relationships, she's very, very good. She writes her poems without any punctuation or capital letters as well, which is something I share sometimes when I'm working with young people about writing, that we can have the rules and we can make a choice to not follow them. And for her, she's made that choice, and it's sort of part of the way her poetry works. Anyway, the next book that I read was Roman Stories, and this was another book club read. Again, this was to do with the fact we wanted to read some books from other places. Roman Stories, the version I read, was translated. It's by Jhumpa Lahiri. Again, I might have pronounced that incorrectly. And it's a collection of short stories about Rome, or set in Rome, to give you a real picture of Rome. And these stories are about just people interacting, about moments, and they are beautifully written. But unfortunately for me, I found it, first of all, it's all very sad and sort of quite like, oh, and it also was quite dense and hard to get into. So my favourite story, which I can't remember what it was called, but it was about a man who falls in love with, or is just drawn to this woman, and they only interact once or twice, and it's just about these moments and then the sort of lifetimes where he thinks of her and they just don't see each other. And it was really sort of beautiful, and the longing and the sadness, it was really lovely. And that one I managed to sort of, it caught my attention. But some of the others, I would discover I was skim reading it and I was like, what's happened? I can't really remember. And some of them were really sad. But what I would say is the sort of imagery was lovely. I just personally kind of couldn't get into it. This was a real favourite in the book club. They did really like it. They also really loved Things Fall Apart. But actually in general, we all kind of went, these were a bit heavy. But yeah, they sort of caused an awful lot of discussion, particularly Roman Stories, actually. And one thing that we do is we then have our evening a little bit themed. So Roman Stories, we had an Italian evening with Italian snacks and wines. It was very nice. Anyway, I do believe book club is a lot about the snacks as well. Anyway, the next book I read was Panic Room by Robert Goddard. And for some reason, I was in the mood for a thriller. And what I was in the mood for was something really horrible. Sometimes you just want to read something. I don't even know why, but I can remember being in the mood and being like, yeah, thriller, that sounds like the one. And this was about a house in Cornwall. So again, I was like, yes, Cornwall. I think I picked this up at the book swap. And I love the southwest of England. So the idea of this big house in Cornwall, thriller, there's this locked room. Ooh, what's going on? That really felt like something I'd want to read. So it starts off with this estate agent called Don, who's asked to go and sort of sort out the house sale. And when he gets there, The housekeeper, who is called Blake, is still there. She's quite evasive and a bit like, doesn't really want to know. And he discovers when he's measuring things up that there's this room that they can't make any account for. So there's a panic room. And the house is being sold by this guy called Jack Harkness, and his wife, who are going through this messy divorce. So you have all these different threads of the different characters and how they're sort of interrelated and their relationships. And it sort of ultimately ends up with a global action, fraud, money type business thing. And I was expecting something a little bit more murdery, let's say. So it wasn't the kind of thriller I was looking for. And I think it just didn't hit the spot, really. And I think that I'm not really into action. I wasn't into all of and now we're in this country and in this hotel and the high powered. It just wasn't my vibe, really. It wasn't what I thought it would be. And yeah, well, just didn't really like it. So that was that one. I gave it 2 stars. The next one was this book, Wintering, by Katherine May. I ordered this when I was buying a couple of books, but it was in the summer and they were like, why are you ordering this? It had been on my TBR for a while and I wanted to get it ready and purchased so I could read it going into the winter, because personally, I am a summer girl, okay? There's several reasons for this. I hate the cold, hate the cold. I know there's lots of people who really hate the hot because you can't cool yourself down so easily as in the cold. You can put on a nice big jumper and put the heating on and blankets. But actually, I find personally, I get to a point where it's in my bones. And if my hands and my nose are cold, my husband always goes, your nose is cold, when I start going, ooh. And it just, it upsets me. I hate being cold. And that feeling of I can't warm up, it's it's just set in. And I hate the short days. I hate the getting up in the dark and coming home from work in the dark. I just, I miss, being in the outdoors more, and I miss the airflow, and I don't like it. I don't like the winter. And it just makes me feel sort of sad and fed up. And I also find clothes quite itchy, and I don't want to wear all these layers. I just want to put on a summer dress and some flip-flops and get on with my life, and coats, and I don't know what to wear, and I've got the layers wrong, and it's not, I know other people like the coziness, but not me. So I thought, well, let's buy this and see if this kind of makes me feel better about the whole winter experience, because I'm not planning to move to another country, and we're still going to have weird weather in this country. So, and winter is still coming. And in this book, Katherine talks about how she went through an illness and there was stuff with her kids and her husband and job and whatever. And she talks about wintering in the context of drawing back, needing to go slower, retreat from life, sort of feed yourself, care for yourself, do less. So she talks about it in the context of stages of life, but also about literally the seasons, and about how naturally as humans we are wired to go through these periods of rest. And I found the writing really helpful, and I don't know that it's solely to do with this book. It might be a little bit to do with self-reflection, but I really feel that I have embraced the cold weather more than usual, and I have bought myself some scented candles, and we're having incense and film nights, and you're just trying to enjoy the things other people enjoy. I'm cozy in my blanket, isn't this nice, rather than, I'm cold and I hate it. And so far, I'm not as angry as I normally am about the weather. So, it's November, and the bit I find really hard is January and February, because it's I've had enough. So I'm sure by that point I will be fed up again. But at the moment, I'm sort of trying to enjoy being indoors, slowing down, and realise that it is good for our minds and our bodies, and it is a thing that we must accept. I did really like this book. I gave it 5 stars. I would recommend. I like the writing style. I found it really thought-provoking, and it was what I needed to read. The next book I read, I think I got from the book swap, and this is Here and Now by Santa Montefiore. So this is about a character called Marigold, who is in her 60s with her husband Dennis, and they have their mum living with them, and they have grown-up children, and it's about their family and the village surrounding them. But Marigold starts to get a bit forgetful, and it's about how everybody kind of deals with that and how that situation continues. And it was just really lovely. I thought it was sensitively written. I thought the characters were sort of very sweet. It was an easy read, but it was also just nice. You know, when sometimes you need to read a nice book. And I like when main characters are older, and Marigold was written really beautifully. And yeah, I just thought it was very sweet. And so not my favourite, not a 5-star read, but definitely a really good book that I enjoyed. So that was nice. Then I read Outlander. So our book club decided we needed a palate cleanser after all of the heaviness of some books covering some really big topics, not just the two I've talked about, but some of the previous ones as well. And one of our members suggested Outlander as something sort of fun. And it's so interesting. So by and large, we hated it. I actually didn't go to the evening where we discussed this because I was away and I actually hadn't finished the book. And I ended up taking the book away on holiday with me. And I was reading it. My husband asked me what this book was. And I was like, oh, you know, it's smutty and it's this historical thing. And I was like, you know, we watched the series. We watched the first episode. He was like, did we? And I brought up the sort of plot of the first episode. He was like, oh yeah, I remember it. We actually never made it through the first episode because I remember his stupid comments just made it unwatchable, because I remember talking about it to a friend of mine whose husband had done the same thing. So yeah, he was like, oh, I do remember. So he started reading the beginning while I was reading the end. He's not a big reader, so he just read a little bit on holiday a couple of times and we were talking about the book. That was all. I offered to keep it and he was like, no, I'm not going to read the rest of it. It reminded me a lot of Wilbur Smith, and I at one point was into the Courtney's series. This was years ago when I was in like my late teens, early 20s, and that has the same kind of thing of historical epic tale with a lot of adult content as well. And I think also has that aspect of a lot of the adult content being quite unpleasant and abusive. The thing with Outlander was Claire's character. So it's about a nurse called Claire who post Second World War meets up with her husband, who they've kind of been separated due to the war. They have a second honeymoon. She goes off in the wilds of Scotland to collect some plants, and she stumbles across this stone circle, and she gets transported back to the 1700s. She gets captured by the English and then by the Scots, and she ends up going around with these Highlanders, and a bunch of stuff happens. So I quite liked her character, and there were aspects of the plot I really enjoyed. But there were two things I had an issue with. First of all, it was so long, in a similar way to the Wilbur Smith books, to be fair. But I just felt like it could have been wrapped up in 300 pages and taken me a lot less time to get through it. But it was one of those, well, I've started, so let's get on with it and find out what actually happens here. Now there's a whole series that I will not read, I don't think. But the other thing is the quite abusive things that happen, particularly, well, between lots of the characters, but the ones that bothered me the most are the ones between Claire and Jamie. And there'd be an interaction, and, you know, she would be in a huff about what happened and they wouldn't be speaking. And then they would talk to each other and she'd remember how much she loved him. And then it was like all was forgiven. And I think maybe there's a space for talking about the context of the historical time and how things were viewed. Like there's a point where Jamie beats her. And I think there's a space for talking about that might have been how things were dealt with, and that he felt, I mean, it kind of was written that way, like he felt he was doing the right thing and she came to understand how he saw it. But still, there were certain instances where I was like, oh, and there was one in particular where I was like, this isn't okay. And a lot of the things between them are quite, I don't think that should be any kind of model of a relationship. And yeah, no, just ick on some of those. So I don't know, bits of it were sort of fun and lighthearted and silly, but yeah, didn't like it. I gave it 3 stars because there were bits of it where I was like, it's quite interesting, or sometimes almost laughing at it, which it's, you know, for me that works. Like with Twilight, I occasionally read it because I find parts of it really funny. I know people I know there's a sinister side. Again, I see both sides, but sometimes you're like, oh my God, you know. So I kind of saw bits of it like that. Anyway, The next book I read was The Confession by Jessie Burton. And this, I think, again, was from the book swap. It had a really beautiful cover. Might have bought it from the library, actually, as withdrawn stock. Anyway, it's about a character called Elise, and she meets a writer called Connie. And they meet in sort of the 80s, and they just fall absolutely head over heels for each other. And it charts their relationship. And then at the same time, you have a woman called Rose in modern day whose mother disappeared when she was a child. No one knows what happened to her. Elise has always carried this with her, and her father's never told her anything about it. And then one day her father kind of says, this woman Connie knew what happened. And so Rose makes contact with the modern day Connie. And so you have these two stories interweaving and coming together. I really like this book. The character of Connie in particular, I just thought was really interestingly written. I like the fact that it's centered on a writer. Obviously, as a writer, I found that interesting. And I was intrigued by it for most of the book. The only thing was, at the end of it, I was left a little bit kind of, It just didn't, I thought it might be like a big kind of, the end was, not as powerful as I'd hoped, but I did like the writing of it, and overall, 4 stars, enjoyed it. The next book that I read was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Again, this was a book club pick, so we, again, wanted something quite light, and this was in the lead up to Halloween. I finished reading this I started it just before Halloween on the 29th of October and finished it on the 4th of November. So sort of reading it over that period. I think it's nice to read themed things. Like, it's nice to read wintering in the autumn, and yeah, it's nice to feel sort of seasonal. And it was a light read, so we sort of picked that when we were in that quite heavy phase. And we, in fact, are having the meeting for it tonight. So I don't know what the others thought of it, other than I know that they read it quite quickly and it's already gone back to the library for the most part. And so the Secret Society of Irregular Witches is about a witch called Mika Moon. And Mika has lived quite an isolated life. And like all witches in this universe, she is an orphan. So all witches, their parents pass away when they're quite young in dramatic circumstances. And the witches kind of stay away from each other, but they come together every now and again and sort of check in on each other, and they all kind of know who each other are. And then Mika has, I think it's a TikTok account, and she's on like Witch Talk. And she gets contacted out of the blue from this person who says, I want you to come to meet us. We need you. And she turns up to this sort of mysterious house, and it turns out that there are 3 young orphan witches, and they're looking for sort of a governess for them. And so she moves into this big house, and it's about her interactions with the people that live there, uncovering the secrets around the place. It's about how the witches sort of change in their views about being witches and about relationships and friendships and things like that. It was light and fluffy and a fun read for that time of year, but the end, there was a turn, and it's not treated as something like super horrible, but it was super horrible. I was like, that is dark, and it didn't feel like it fitted with this sort of fun feel of the whole book. It was also a bit fluffy for me for the most of the book, in sort of the dialogue, and it's like it had these comedy bits, but they weren't that funny, and then weird interactions that were meant to be like haha, and I was like, it's just a bit silly. And then, as I say, then it had this real macabre side to it that I was like, not sure. Overall, I enjoyed reading it, but yeah, just a few things that meant that it didn't really land for me. Then, pick this up from the book swap. I will either give this back to the book swap or pop it to the charity shop, because the book swap is quite full. But I really enjoyed reading this. It's just, I would like to pass it on for someone else. So this is Wildlings by Steve Backshall and Helen Glover, who are partners. I don't know if they're married, and they've got children. They've got twins and then a non-twin, 3 children. Anyway, it's about kind of things you can do with your family to connect with nature. And I really, really loved this. So it's got photos, and then it talks about things you could do, like making bird feeders or doing treasure hunts, or like ways of getting outside and what to wear, and rivers and the sea and mud and ice and rain, all the different kind of contexts, things you can do in those different scenarios, how to get outside, how to engage with nature, how to sort of enjoy activities get out, get away from screens, that kind of thing. And I felt it was really well written in that it didn't judge in any way anyone who didn't know how to do these things. Like if you don't know how to light a fire, or you don't know what a particular creature is, or you don't, like, it explained just step by step all of these things, had no kind of assumptions. And I felt everything was well explained and well approached. And there are such a host of activities that some of them totally easily done. And it even included like things to do indoors to do with nature on a rainy day. It was really well put together. It is really well put together. It also has interviews with various sort of outdoorsy people, including Olympians, because Helen Glover is an Olympic rower, canoer, something like that. Forget now. But yeah, lots of sort of sports people and outdoorsy people about the importance of getting outside, getting moving, interacting with nature. As a writer personally who writes about the environment, obviously this was something that I just really connected with. And for me, what I liked is that I beat myself up sometimes about the fact that I don't go outside enough. I don't get the kids out enough. They watch too much screens, you know, all of the usual kind of I could do better. But reading this, I was like, oh, we've done most of these things, you know. The kids have gone paddleboarding with me. We've snorkeled. We walk instead of driving virtually everywhere. And while we're walking virtually everywhere, what am I talking about? We don't walk like 20 miles, but anything local. We don't take the car. We'll always walk. We have a dog, so we're out walking the dog a lot. So I think we're more outdoorsy than I give myself credit for. And I felt like I sort of felt a gentle encouragement whilst at the same time personally going, oh, actually I do quite a lot. So I think whether you're looking for ideas because you want to do more, I think whatever level you're at in terms of getting yourself outside and getting involved in nature and, you know, getting stuck in with woodlands and mud and whatever. So whether you have not really ever done it and you want some ideas, or like me, apparently I'm a person that does it quite a lot, but I would like maybe some more ideas and just a bit of reassurance that, yeah, like you're doing all right here. I think it was really lovely. I read it so quickly. In fact, one of the days when I was reading this, I was teaching. One of the kids was like, wow, you've got through so much of that book, because it's quite a quick read, and they couldn't believe how much of a chunk I'd read, because I make a point, if I'm teaching, it to be seen reading. So if the children are doing quiet reading, I will also do quiet reading. Or at times, if they're working on something like a test, if I haven't got some admin to do, I will read, because I think it's good as an adult to model that behaviour. Anyway, the last one that I read in this section of books that I read was The Keeper of Lost Things. I literally finished this yesterday. Fun story. So I probably will keep this because I really like this. In fact, the books that I have in person are probably all 5-star reads. But The Keeper of Lost Things, I got coffee on it. And I'll tell you the little story of it. So I was at work and I put my coffee in my reusable thermos mug thing and went to put the hot water on it. And it's like a hot water dispenser rather than a kettle. And they disconnected it because there was a problem. So there was no hot water. So I had these like coffee granules in some leftover coffee because it was like my second coffee of the day. And I was like, oh, no coffee. And I was joking about it, like, we need caffeine. And, oh, I'm not going to teach unless I've had any coffee. And then I dropped my mug cup thing, you know what I mean, reusable coffee container, into my bag and went off. And normally I would hold it because it would have a coffee in it, but I just sort of dropped it in there and coffee went everywhere. Like slightly, partially dissolved coffee. In fact, it's all over my charger that's here next to me. So, yeah, I got coffee on my book. That's sad. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. This is about a character called Anthony Perdrew, and he is an old man and he collects lost things. So he collects buttons and jigsaw pieces and whatever, gloves, little lost things, and he labels them with where he found them and what they are. And then he writes little stories. He's a writer. He writes a short story attached to each one. And Anthony realises he is not going to live very much longer, and he decides to leave all of his lost objects and his house to his housekeeper, Laura. So it then follows Laura in the wake of Anthony's passing. And by the way, one thing is, so he's called Anthony because St. Anthony is the saint of lost things. And when they had that moment in the book where they revealed that, I went, and Anthony's wife partner, they didn't get married, was Therese of the flowers, Saint of the Flowers. And I was like, I actually really like that. The reason I like it, so my mother-in-law, click your wrist, And I also just caught the glare of my glasses in the viewfinder. Sorry, it's looking at myself. I had to wear my glasses so I can see when I'm reading. Anyway, so my mother-in-law, if she loses something, will say, well, I'm going to say a prayer to St. Anthony, because it wasn't something I'd come across until I met her, that if you pray to St. Anthony, whatever you've lost will appear again. And she swears by it. And then when she finds it, she'll go, see, I did a prayer to St. Anthony. So if she like loses an earring, she'll be like, right. I remember her doing this. She lost a really lovely earring and was like, I'm going to pray to St. Anthony, and got home and found it. So it's a thing that she does, and I think of her when I think of St. Anthony. So that was just a really lovely, and she actually gave me this. She did. I didn't get this from the book swap or anything. She gave it to me. Anyway, that aside, it did just have that moment of like, oh, that's really nice. So St. Anthony. Anyway, so we are then left when Anthony passes away. I loved that naming of the characters and that it's referenced. And then Laura, the housekeeper, is trying to pair up the lost things with the people that own them. And Laura is helped by a teenager with Down syndrome who lives over the road, and a sort of general jobs groundskeeper-y kind of man called Freddie, who also works in the property. And it's sort of about all of their relationships, and it's a lot about closure, and it was really beautiful. It's got a certain amount of sort of spirituality and sort of magic moments, and there's a lot of really beautiful touches. It's peppered with the books, with the stories written about the lost things. So you have all these little short stories. There's also a side narrative of some characters in a publishing company, and how they sort of come to weave into the story. I just thought it was really beautifully written, really kind of intricately put together, and had lots of like, oh, moments. There was a couple of little things. There's one part of it that was quite kind of, oh, that's not very nice. And again, I don't want to give spoilers, so I shan't say. And a few of the interactions between Laura and Freddie that I felt were on the side of what I was saying earlier, where something's meant to be like humorous and light, and to me it almost becomes fake. So I would say really it's probably more of a 4.5 star, but I really liked it. I really enjoyed reading it. I had lots of moments of like, oh, that's really nice, or oh, that's so interesting, or oh wow, that's really clever. So I just thought it was really well put together, and I really enjoyed reading it. And yeah, I shall decide whether I'm going to keep it or pass it along. Yeah, not sure yet. Might see if my mother-in-law wants it back. She usually doesn't, but I might ask her, because she said she really liked that as well. Anyway, so that's all of the books that I read since I last talked about it. Will I do another reading wrap-up soon? Probably not. But as I said, you can catch my little mini reviews on Shorts. So if you subscribe to the channel, you'll see those. And at some point, I'll talk about the books that I read. You can follow me on Goodreads. The thing is, I mostly do AuthorTube content, and I get carried away with talking about writing stuff, and then I forget about talking about what I read. But surely all authors, I love books. And I love being in a book club. And I feel like being in a book club, it gives me a certain amount of drive to read, and other people pushing me to read books that I might not otherwise read, and to think about them more deeply. At some point I would love to sort of keep more notes and keep a bit of a journal about it to encourage me to read deeper, because I can be a bit of a skim reader, but I don't know, maybe one day. But yeah, I've just been enjoying reading. That's what's nice. I feel like I've read a lot since sort of September, and that feels really nice to be like in a bit of a groove with it, enjoying lots of different kinds of books and finding some real favourites along the way. So it's been really nice. Anyway, as I say, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Oh, the speaking today. It's because I'm tired. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, please hit like. Leave me a comment if there are any books you think that I would enjoy. Really, I like sort of nice fiction that makes me feel like, oh, or stuff, feminist stuff, or outdoorsy things. That's my vibe. So yeah, let me know if there are things that you think that I would enjoy. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all soon for another video. Take care.